Did you ever think that what you're eating and how you're eating it could be impacting your mental health? Most people won't be aware of this, and this is why we need to talk about it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bri and I am a pre-qualified psychologist. Today we're going to talk about glucose. We will discover how glucose impacts our brain and as a consequence how it also impacts our mental health. We are also going to understand how we can reduce the impact of glucose on our mental health by following some tricks outlined in the book The Glucose Revolution by Jesse Unchauspe. I am very sorry if I'm not pronouncing this correctly. My pronunciation must be very bad. Anyway, you will find her as the glucosegoddess on Instagram as well. This video will be divided into chapters, and without further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 1. What is glucose? Glucose is basically a sugar molecule. It is the primary source of energy in our body and can be mainly found in carbohydrates. Being the primary source of energy for our body, glucose is extremely important. However, something that can be damaging for our body and for our mental health as well is what Jesse in a book calls glucose spikes. A glucose spike is a variation in our glucose level of more than 1.7 milliliters. So for example, we will all be familiar with the traditional glucose monitors, the one where you basically need to pinch your finger. Well, let's say that before eating, the monitors show that your glucose is equal to 5. And then after eating, your glucose will be displayed as 7.2. Well, that's a big increase actually. It's an increase of more than 1.7. Therefore, that is what is considered a glucose spike. So what we want is not to reduce our glucose levels as a whole. We just want to reduce our glucose spikes throughout the day and keep the glucose as a whole relatively stable. But why do we need to do that? Chapter 2, the effects of glucose on the brain. So let's see what happens in our bodies when glucose enters in the picture. So let's say we eat something, glucose enters our body, and it is then transported into the brain by some special transports called GLUTs. These GLUTs make the glucose arrive into the brain, and once in the brain, the glucose will go through a process called glycolysis, through which glucose is broken down into something that we call the pyruvates. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing this in the correct way. These pyruvates will in turn generate something called ATP. This actually has a much longer name, but I don't really want to test my spelling skills today. ATP is the primary energy currency of our cells. In fact, ATP is responsible for powering various processes in the brain, including the synthesis, which basically means the production of neurotransmitters. Some of the neurotransmitters that are synthesized at this stage are glutamate and acetylcholine that are responsible for memory, learning, and synaptic plasticity. Serotonin that is responsible for regulating mood, emotions, and sleep-wake cycles, and dopamine. And if you saw my video on bad habits, you will know that this is the neurotransmitter involved in the reward system, that is basically what tells our brain that whatever we just did was very nice and therefore it would be very good if we did it again. This is also why most of us will be addicted to some degree to sugars. What we need to understand is that when we have glucose spikes, all these neurotransmitters get synthesized very quickly, but then they drop all of a sudden. And if we have frequent glucose spikes, we will see a fluctuation of all these neurotransmitters throughout the day. And according to scientists, this could be the reason why glucose spikes are bad for our mental health, although this is still a topic that is very much under research. Chapter 3. How does glucose impact our mental health? Although more research needs to be conducted on the brain mechanisms caused by glucose spikes, numerous studies have demonstrated a link between glucose spikes and mental health difficulties. The majority of studies has been conducted on people with diabetes, and that is a population that is obviously very much inclined to glucose spikes. For example, a study found that 25% of males with diabetes suffer from depression. Another study also found that women with diabetes were more prone to lower quality of life and negative mood, but also anger, sadness, and nervousness. I know what you're thinking. If I don't have diabetes, why should I care about all of this? Well, according to scientists, people with diabetes are not the only ones that are affected by this. Healthy individuals that consume big amounts of carbohydrates and sugary foods may also experience glucose spikes and suffer from mental health difficulties as a consequence of this. For example, a study conducted in 2017 found that people that frequently consumed sugary foods and drinks were also more prone to suffer from depression and other mental health difficulties. However, all these studies stress that it is not really the quantity of glucose, but it is more the fluctuation of glucose throughout the day that affects people's mental health. And this is also what Jessie says in her book. If you're curious and want to know whether you do have this glucose spikes throughout the day, all you have to do is to get a glucose monitor and check your glucose regularly throughout the day and see whether you have any spikes. Nowadays, there are also continuous glucose monitors that you can put on your arm and see how your glucose changes throughout the day. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a thumbs up or leave a comment, as it really helps the algorithm apparently. Chapter 4. How to flatten the glucose curve according to the glucose goddess. So, glucose spikes, bad for us. But does this mean that we are not allowed to eat carbs or sugary foods anymore? Well, I hope not, because I will probably not be happy about it. I do love my carbs and I do love my sugary foods. So what do? So in her book and on her Instagram page, Jessie shares some tips on how to flatten the glucose curve based on research on the topic. I am just going to list a few of the tips that she mentions in her book here. If you want to know more, I strongly advise you read her book and also check her Instagram page, where she often refers to up-to-date research on the field. So, tip number 1, start with savory. Starting with a sugary breakfast can apparently guarantee you to be on a glucose roller coaster for the rest of your day. Therefore, in the morning, it's best if you have a savory breakfast compared to a sweet one. What do you do if you don't have breakfast in the morning? Well, just make sure that your first meal of the day is not a sugary one. Tip number 2, eat food in the right order. According to Jessie, eating food in the right order is a great way to flatten the glucose curve. So what is the right order, you might ask? So veggies first, protein and fats second, and carbohydrates and sugar last. So for example, let's say we are having some fish with a salad and potatoes. We're gonna eat the salad first, we're gonna eat the fish second, and we're gonna eat the potatoes last. Tip number 3, eat sugar as a dessert and not as a snack. Eating sugar on an empty stomach is a one-way ticket to a glucose spike. So for example, let's say that you want to eat a cake. It's so much better to eat a cake at the end of a meal, so as a dessert, instead of having it throughout the day on an empty stomach as a snack. Tip number 4, put clothes on your carbs. Your glucose spikes can be reduced if you combine your carbohydrate with a source of fats, for example. Let's say again that you want to have a cake. Cake on its own, big glucose spike. But piece of cake combined with a full-fat Greek yogurt will result in a much smaller glucose increase. And lastly, tip number 5, move after eating. According to Jessie, even 10 minutes of a low-intensity exercise, so for example a walk, after a meal can help reduce possible glucose spikes. These are just a few tips, and as Jessie says herself, you don't have to do them all, you can just do the ones that resonate with you the most and that you think will be easier for you to incorporate in your routine. If you want to know more about the scientific evidences behind these tips, as well as more tips, I again strongly advise you to read Jessie's book or to check her Instagram page. In conclusion, glucose spikes can negatively impact our mental health, but some tricks can help you reduce your glucose spikes throughout the day. I'm not saying that these tips will improve your mental health all of a sudden, especially if you struggle with chronic difficulties or you are severely impacted by your mental health. But if you are struggling with your mental health, checking your diet will be a good place to start. And this brings us to the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, you can subscribe to the channel to avoid missing future videos. As usual, I'm going to leave some references in the description box below, where you will also find my socials and my website. And that is really all for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!